Obandes. She was cataloguing alone after hours when she found the mirror in the abandoned dressing room beneath the stage. Large, tarnished, framed by dead light bulbs. She began noting its details, then noticed the dust motes in the reflection moving in a different direction from those in the room. Then noticed the reflected door behind her was open. The door behind her was closed, and in the gap a figure in stage costume, watching her work. Don't work alone in abandoned theaters after hours tonight. It is time for chapter 150. Old theaters hold their histories differently from other buildings. The performances that filled them leave something that does not entirely depart when the audience goes home. A residue of attention, of emotion, directed repeatedly at the same stage across many years. Most people who work in old theaters sense this without being able to name it precisely. The particular quality of a space that has held a great deal of human feeling for a long time. But occasionally a theater holds something more specific than residue, something that did not leave when it should have. That has been waiting in the spaces beneath the stage, in the dressing rooms that smell of old velvet and grease paint, for someone to finally pay it the right kind of attention. A woman had been hired to catalogue the contents of a historic theater scheduled for renovation. The theater had been closed for several years. Her work was methodical, working through each room systematically, noting contents, condition, provenance where determinable. She worked alone after hours by preference. The theater was quieter then, more itself. She had been working through the building for 3 weeks when she reached the dressing rooms beneath the stage. Small rooms, still containing the remnants of decades of theatrical use, costumes, makeup tables. And in the largest dressing room, pushed against the far wall, partially obscured by a clothing rack that had fallen across it, a large vanity mirror, framed by light bulbs, all dead, tarnished across much of its surface. She began noting its details in her catalogue. She was writing her description when she noticed the dust motes. The room was disturbed enough from her moving through it that dust moved visibly in the air. She could see it in the mirror, floating, catching the light of her work lamp, and noticed that the movement of the dust in the reflection was different from the movement in the room. Not dramatically, simply inconsistent, as though the air in the reflected room was moving according to different currents than the air in the actual room. She stopped writing, looked more carefully at the mirror, at the reflection of the room behind her, and noticed the door. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here and that you intend to find your way back. If you have a story of your own, Granny is always listening, watching, waiting. The dressing room door behind her was closed. She had closed it when she entered, old habit in unfamiliar buildings, closing doors behind her. The door in the mirror's reflection was open, not wide, simply ajar. the particular degree of open that a door reaches when someone has just passed through it, or is about to. She turned to look at the actual door. Closed. She turned back to the mirror, the reflected door, still open. She stood between the actual closed door and its reflected open version and thought carefully about what she was seeing, then looked at what was visible in the gap of the reflected open door. A figure, in costume, standing in the corridor beyond the reflected door, looking in, with the patient stillness of someone who has been waiting a very long time to be noticed. Shak Koi, that stillness, cold in the way of something that has learned to wait without losing attention. I wonder, have you ever worked alone in a space that belonged to another time? Felt the particular quality of somewhere that holds more than its current emptiness suggests? Perhaps something noticed you before you noticed it. If you have a story of your own, this quiet room has space for your experiences too. Granny is always listening. She did not turn around again, kept her eyes on the mirror. The figure in the reflected corridor did not move, simply stood in the gap of the open door. In costume, she could see enough of it to identify it as theatrical, period, belonging to an era of the theater's history she had been reading about in the archived programs she had catalogued earlier in the week. She thought about the programs, about the performances they documented, about the last performance in this theater before it closed, about the particular dressing room she was standing in and whose name appeared most frequently in connection with it, and about whether the figure in the costume in the reflected corridor was waiting to be acknowledged or waiting for something else entirely. You are still here. Good. Some stories need a witness all the way to the end. I wonder, if you were working alone in an abandoned theater and something in a mirror noticed you first, would you keep working, or would you leave the catalog unfinished? She finished the catalog entry for the mirror, noted its dimensions, condition, frame style, provenance uncertain, did not note what she had observed in the reflection, completed her work in the dressing room, left. She told me she went back the following day, in daylight, with a colleague, under the pretense of needing a second opinion on some items. The colleague noticed nothing unusual about the mirror. She checked the reflection while her colleague was occupied elsewhere. The door in the reflection was closed, the corridor behind it empty. She completed the catalog without returning to the dressing room alone. The mirror was noted in her final report as a significant item worth preserving. She did not specify why she felt it was significant. Some things belong in the catalog, others belong in the keeping. I think about what theaters accumulate across decades of performance, not just the physical residue, the costumes, the makeup tables, the mirrors surrounded by dead light bulbs, but the other kind, the residue of attention and emotion and the particular human effort of performing the same role night after night until it becomes something more than performance, until the role and the person performing it become difficult to separate. And occasionally, in the dressing rooms where that separation happened most completely, Something of that indistinction remains, still in costume, still waiting in the corridor for the call that no longer comes, watching through a gap in a door that is closed to the living, but open still in the mirror to whatever the mirror remembers of the theater as it was. Ndania. Some performances run considerably longer than their scheduled closing night. I have watched a few, from seats that were supposed to be empty. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you ever work alone in an old theater, cataloging, restoring, simply exploring, pay attention to the mirrors in the dressing rooms beneath the stage. Not to your own reflection, to what is behind your reflection, to the doors in the reflection and whether they match the doors in the room, to the dust motes and whether they move according to the same currents in the glass as in the air. And if you find a door in the mirror that is open when the door in the room is closed, look carefully at what is visible in the gap. Because whatever is standing in that reflected corridor has been standing there since the theater's last performance, has been waiting in the particular patient stillness of something that knows how to wait for an audience, and has been waiting for exactly the right person to finally look carefully enough at the mirror to notice it waiting. That person is now you. Finish your work, note the mirror in the catalog, and leave the rest out of the report. If this story stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting. And if you wish others to find their way here too, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. I would not object. And if you have a story of your own, this quiet room has space for your experiences too. Granny is always listening.